Pen, thank you for being here. Don't forget the microphone,
Yes.
by the way. We usually have a panel where there are multiple people. We're talking about aspects of the industry. Pen is an extremely inspiring individual, and I'm wondering how often people have pointed out that you're a writer and your first name's Pen.
Oh.
I had to ask that stupid question.
Yes. Well, my real name is Penray. My father's name was Raymond, and he called my brother Gilray, and my sister's delighted just to be called Cheryl. So I never loved Penray. It sounded weird, so I called myself Pen.
Where does Penray come from?
I think my father met some Dutch guy who was working on a set, now this is true. I did Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and my brother was named after a guy called Gil. And it turned out that the second unit cameraman was that gentleman. His name was Gil. And he unfortunately passed away shortly after shooting the movie. And then my father said, oh, by the way, that was the guy I named your brother after.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, you've also been a part of so many other projects, from Backdraft to Tank Girl to, and I'm trying to remember right off the top of my head, all these others. You're attached as a producer right now of something that just completed with a ridiculously huge cast. Christopher Plummer.
Oh, yes,
and,
right. Last Full Measure.
Last Full Measure. So Penn is still working, and he has been working in this industry, technically you could argue, since 15.
Yes.
Right.
Well, actually, I rode into my movies career on an alligator when I was 4 years old. My parents were making short films that went into the movie theaters, and I was the kid they couldn't afford a babysitter for, I guess, because they took me along. So I can remember seeing how people were made dynamic by a camera. They would suddenly draw a crowd, and you go into a darkened room, and the magic of seeing that image giant on a screen. And I was even taken to Water Street to meet the distributors. So at the age of 4, I was meeting people that were in the movie business, and that started this yearning to do something magical with my life. The thing riding an alligator, I don't think my mother could have been there that day. It was a real live alligator, but the woman whose house we were shooting in also had a crocodile in a tank on the wall, and that seemed to scare her. Anytime I got near that, she was really bristly and pushed me away. So,
but the alligator
the alligator didn't seem to worry her at all. I guess she filled it up with chickens or something. But and I love cameras. I love storytelling. I think the sound effects are magical. Everything I believe about the opportunity to tell stories comes from that early experience. My mother died when I was young. I was 8. And that also informs subconsciously the scripts I write when I write on spec. And I call those life scripts. And those are the stories that tell you to write as opposed to the ones you're trying to write for people. So I have an immense admiration and joy from creating. I also went through shit and hell when I was 15. I had a stepmother who was Cruella de Vil on acid. My father was against me being creative. The school system was punishing me by trying to knock my creativity out of me to make me a real employable person. My father sent me to an electric blanket factory to get a job. The guy, I think, figured I would electrocute some of his customers so wouldn't give me one.
No.
And so I left school at 15 and tried to start my own businesses. And
what were the businesses that you were starting?
I tried starting a photography business, and I tried becoming a writer. I sold one article of myself reflected in various surfaces photographed called Go Shoot Yourself for a national photography magazine. And I did talk my way into letting the BBC let me photograph the Rolling Stones when I was 17.
It's like Almost Famous.
So I had, it was a bit, I watched that movie with nostalgia. So I had this, but there's enormous periods where nothing good happened. And I had this yearning and would occasionally accomplish something and fled, I really mean fled to Canada at 19, thinking I was a washed up failure, and found a country that actually would invest in someone like me, which was my ideas as opposed to my accent or my status in education. And,
where'd you live? What did you do in terms of housing?
Well, I was lucky enough to get a job in a film lab, working at night, which is it's a horrible, hard business. You go to work when everybody's going home, and you work through the night. And they put me up at 19 as their quality control person. And your job was to look at movies upside down at 4 times normal speed to see if there are any scratches. And they should have fired me because I was sending prints back because I was standing a certain way, the seam looked like a scratch. So I almost bankrupted them, but I learned about how film goes together. I was very lucky. And then I worked for an educational film company in Canada, making belligerently uninspiring movies. And I just hated it. And the very first, once I was lucky enough to be with a company that made self-inspired films. And these guys made films that they chose to make, and they actually made a film with Marshall McLuhan, who was the guru of communications. And so suddenly there's this uneducated person listening to the top guru of communications in the world and seeing him just playing.
And you were how old?
I was 20, 22, somewhere in that range. And that sense of playfulness and discovery sort of gave me a permission to break down a lot of the must-dos. And so I quit that company and formed my own with my partners, cashed in my pension. I had put together a large hippie film house, and we all lived together. My wife moved in with me. Her parents were very suspect, and I insisted that they know who we were and what we were doing. And because we all shared the costs, we all ate spaghetti, we could afford to make small films, and we started making our own movies.
And where was the money coming from? You just your own money?
Well, I used my own money. I managed to borrow the cameras, shoot short ends, get a friend to play the guitar to the film, and I made a film for $100, which the Canadian television gave us $1,000 for.
Okay.
And you go, okay, well, there's a business here.
Yeah,
Holy shit.
right.
So,
And that was what year, roughly?
1970.
70. So what, I mean, we'll
This is ancient history. We should get to
No,
writing.
this is great,
Okay.
because there's
Sorry.
a reason of the segue here, because you mentioned 2 things, and one thing I want to get to is, okay, what was the big, how did you make your way to Los Angeles? How long have you been in town here? And then what was your big, huge break that really kind of locked you in terms of career? We'll get to that in a second, but I do want to talk about, and for everybody in the audience, you've probably heard me talk about this before, but when I work with my writers through the Story Farm, one of the only journaling exercises I have them go through is this little exercise I call voice pressure points. And it's really just looking back through your life, whether it was last week or 25, 30, 50 years ago, at points that changed your perspective. Something happened where you believed one thing happened, it changed your perspective, either positively or negatively. And you mentioned when your mom died, that changed you.
Oh, absolutely.
And that has been feeding your voice since then. Are there other moments that helped shape your voice in a way where you look back and you're like, oh, all these characters have a similarity, but I'm not really that person? Like Pen and I were talking about my book about this 16-year-old shredded-winged female fairy. Obviously, I have 0 in common with that, but her personality is kind of the opposite of me. And that was where this little exercise came from. I'm like, why am I the one who can write that character? And then I was diving in and really looking at that. So when you look at some of the characters in your scripts, do you see somewhat of a pattern?
Yeah, I do. There's 2 kinds of scripts, which are ones you're hard to write for them, which are formula, or if you're chasing a success, but it's not your nature to write that kind of thing. Someone says, well, horror movies are selling and you try and write one. Those are you will probably give up on if other people give up on them. But if you surrender to your nature and you write what I call life scripts, which are the scripts that seem irrational sometimes, you're going to find that your voice comes out of your subconscious. And if you've been damaged, or if you come from a certain zeitgeist, or you allow yourself to, and I say write dangerously. And when I say dangerously, I mean write the places that scare you about whether you'll be accepted for writing it, because you're getting closer and closer to your voice.
And the truth.
And the truth of who you are, and your truth of what human beings are. And I think we're all designed to tell stories, but we get held up by what we think are the formulas we're supposed to write in order to be accepted. And those are written by people who don't actually write. The formulas come in books that have an analyzed version of the process of writing, and they're useful as a kind of checklist at the end of the process. But I write the most incredibly strange ways, and not the same every time. I've written a script that's impassioned me. One of the most biggest life events for me writing it And I only had the last 4 lines, and then managed to find the rest of it. But I knew for 2 years I was going to write a historical story of a woman. And finally, it just blossomed out of me. I've written a script on Houdini because I got the ending to a movie about Houdini, and then went backwards and figured out all the rest of it. I feel like the books that you read tend to say that you have to have these elements, and I say writing the first draft of anything is like Lewis and Clark. Any fucking way to the coast is legitimate. And so if you're passionate to discover, there is no wrong. You can't blame yourself when you're writing to an adventurous discovery of what's in your soul. And so you write that, and you just charge to the coast, because it's not the end, it's the beginning. When you get to the coast, you must celebrate. You must dance in the water of your discoveries and accomplishment. Because we don't stop very often. We tend to go back to punish ourselves, or we give it to someone, they say, oh, it's not perfect, and you go, no. So, but it is perfect, because if you accomplish that, it's a monumental achievement. And then what I say the next job is, you share it with people. We were talking about this, safe people. You don't share your scripts with the angry, the jealous, the know-it-alls. You don't share them with the people that are too practical to be able to have an imagination to see how you can leap over problems in them. You must share the scripts.
You had a much nicer way of titling.
Yes, well, I call them story midwives.
I call them the no bullshit readers, but
yes.
The story midwife sounds a lot more comfortable.
And writers will come together in groups and share their work like this. And those people are helping you to make sure that you gave birth to something, not telling you what sex it should be, but trying to give you the strength to go through the process. And they'll make suggestions that are either giving you clarity of what they didn't understand so the script will be stronger than the next person you give it to, or sometimes they give you a note and you just smile and say, oh, gosh, darn. Yeah, now I'm going to go back in because the note is so good, it inspires a whole nother ripple.
And you're still getting that, right? Like
I'm still getting that. I'm still writing a script that I've been fighting to come out of me. The first draft that came out of me was like 2005. But
that's not pages, that's the year.
But I started the project in 1988 and couldn't get it to come out of me because I was talked out of writing it back then. And
was it for like marketing reasons, or people were saying this isn't going to sell? Or?
To be very specific, I had this vision of writing a movie that involved a Native American theme. I thought a detective mystery would be a good way to do that because it would take you into a community but follow a plot form that was acceptable to an American audience. And just when I was starting to write it and I was geared up, and it's what I call being ripe, which is just when everything is in your body ready to go, my partners said, well, it doesn't sound too good, plus there's this thing called Thunderheart, and Robert De Niro's going to star in it. John Fusco's written this brilliant script, so you're wasting your time. And I have to accept that I allowed myself to be talked out of it. I can't blame them. I take responsibility, so I didn't write it. I hated myself. I was ready to write something that was a passion script. There was things in it that I still tingle about. And Thunderheart didn't get made for 4 years. So I'm going to jump to Robin Hood for a second, if I may. Yeah. So after having the privilege of having a son with my wife, I wanted to write a story, and it was me being told by my inner instincts to write a story that was about people who fought for the future of other people, which I call the makers of life, as opposed to the takers of life, which were people who killed people as target practice or used them like 10-pin bowling, which was the kind of movie that Schwarzenegger and Stallone were making. And I just had this vision of making a film about a spoiled, rich asshole who was a lord who lied to his father, gone off to the Crusades when his father said it was wrong to force another man to your religion, comes home and finds his father's dead, and then tries to use his peasants to take out his anger, and ends up being willing to die for the future of his peasants' children. And I also wanted to put a Muslim and a Christian side by side instead of fighting each other as an illustration of what people could learn from each other. And 3 studios I pitched it to told me it was the stupidest idea. They said men with swords, no one wants to see them, they want to see guns. My own partner was resistant because he didn't think an Arab would fit into Robin Hood at that point. And our assistant said, you know, I think it's pretty cool. I'll help you if you start it. And I was willing to give up on it. And it was that man, just that little glow, that little blow of, on my ember of encouragement. That's how powerful encouragement is. So I started writing. My partner, John, looked at what I was writing and immediately saw how I could put an arrow, because it was now there and it wasn't vague. And when I finished writing, I wrote a complete 3 weeks, 100 pages of non-laid out text. I don't write in the form of final draft until I finish my first draft. I want to be able to play up and down, move ideas around, and not feel trapped. And then I love final draft when I'm in it, because then the next layer is putting the words on the page in a way that's spectacularly easy to read or really grip you. So I get to that point where I have to go write a horror movie for our company because we need money. And I give the script to John. I say, whatever you want to add to it, please do, because I trusted him. And he got 3/4 of the way through the script, and we heard that John McTiernan at Fox was making Robin Hood, and he'd done Die Hard, and that our script was a waste of time, and John wanted to stop writing. And I said, I'm not doing this twice to myself. So we wrote Robin Hood thinking it was a spectacular waste of time, but at least I got to the end of it.
And now, you were established by this point. They knew who you were, at least in terms of,
yes,
okay,
we'd
you've done
written
this.
some scripts for
Yeah.
the studios. Going backwards and jumping around, which isn't a bad way to tell a story. We did a lot of films in Canada. I was a coward. I didn't know how to write. I was scared of my abilities. I didn't want to put myself out and be judged. And so I like putting a team of people around me, and we made films. We didn't even put credits on the early ones so that no one was responsible. And a lot of that was from being beaten up. And then what we started to do was started to notice that if you win awards, people judge your films differently from if you don't. And so the same movie would sell if it had an award, but it wouldn't move at all. So we started entering, and we won a lot of awards, and I got medals from the Queen for our films, but I did not dare do a drama until quite late. And I've been making films in our own company for about 6-7 years when a friend of mine phoned me up and said, do you know that CBC has a program for younger filmmakers where you can get $10,000 to make anything you want? And at that point, I said, okay, this is my life choice. I'm gonna try writing a drama. It scares the shit out of me, but I can't go on not trying. So I wrote a script that was about, and we'd made a number of films on thoroughbred horses because my partner loved the races, and I could always get him to go make a movie with me if we were going to the races. I'd heard about this thing where if you have a mare giving birth and it's breech birthing, you have at least 20 minutes or no more to turn the mare in the uterus, turn the foal in the uterus, or choose which one you kill. And I made that the baseline of a story built around the racetrack and built around a trainer who was broke and had got his mare in stud, and the foal was going to be his future, his financial goldmine. And wrote that script without knowing how to lay out a script, without knowing how to write with an actor in mind, none of that. I wrote a half-hour drama, and the CBC said yes. And then I directed it with an all-documentary crew. I had no idea what I was doing. The script.
They said yes to you directing it,
yes,
too.
oh yeah, that was the whole point. It was like, no one else got to direct it. It was my thing. And my partner edited it like a sports movie, which is he took every pause out of it. And now that works in sports movies because you're constantly in tension. But this movie looked horrible. It was like, this is characters, lines, you know. And I just wanted to kill myself. I had let everybody down. I was a tremendous failure. This was the stupidest thing. I was right never to try to write. And then I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? How do I? So I asked my partner, could we look at the script, look at the cut again? And I said, well, what happens before he speaks? So my partner, in those days, you took out strips of film, undid the sellotape on it, put it in, said, okay. So we look at it, and it looks like the guy's thinking. You go, oh. And then what happens if we took that image of the guy in the corner? He looks kind of sad. What happens if we put him right there? And we go, oh. So I thought I was salvaging and doctoring my movie. I thought I was cheating because I hadn't written it, I hadn't just done it. And the end result won 14 awards. It was nominated for one of the best pictures in Canada and reviewed in TV Guide as the best movie of any length ever shown on television in Canada.
Oh my God, what's the name of the movie?
It's called If Wishes Were Horses, and it's not around anywhere. Norman Jewison saw it and said, I'd like you to come to Hollywood, I'd like to mentor you. And I'm going, hey, no, you got the wrong guy. This is absolutely stupid. I'm not any good. This is just a mistake. I don't deserve it. And the same part of me said, oh my God, this is your dream. And I was really torn. And I decided to step into my dream, and it scared me. And then I come to Hollywood, and I am overwhelmed, because I'm this little documentary guy. And
Did you go with your own crew and team, or was
No,
it just
no, this was me, paid for by the Canadian government. Just turning up, you know, and Norman's people were incredible. They invited me into all of their meetings as if I was a fellow producer.
Did you say Norman Lear?
Norman Jewison.
Jewison, got it.
In the
okay.
Heat of the Night,
Yeah.
The Russians Are Coming, Moonstruck, Canadian filmmaker who is just incredibly generous. And one of the reasons I love giving back is, and even being here tonight, I love being here because this man changed my life by him giving me access to opportunity. And he encouraged me by default. He saw things in me I didn't know I had. And I now know I have those things, but I didn't know at the time. So I was sabotaging myself. And I now say my errors of omission have cost me a lot more than my errors of commission, where I made a fool of myself a little bit. And I really recommend looking at the times when you come to a crunch point and saying, am I counting out, or would I better be off to look at my life later and say, I should have gone and tried it? And I'd say to you, go and try it, because I can look backwards. And Einstein said, if not, he was smarter people who just stayed at things longer. It's not that I'm smarter. I've just done a lot more stuff in my life now. And I can guarantee you that take on those challenges, dive into those opportunities, because you won't regret it. And
that's a really good segue in terms of, because you naturally went into that next question of what your big break was, but I wanted to talk about the feeling of that big break. And there has to be, like, the thing about that type of break, though, it wasn't this immediate, okay, I'm successful now. You knew you had a lot of work to do. And that is scary. And I think really what you're talking about is a fear of success once that opportunity is presented. Most of us listening to that would be like, of course I'd take it. But then again, I mean, you don't know how you would react to that kind of situation.
Oh, it's changed.
When the fellows received their, you won, this is, of course they're going to come, but it's daunting.
I feel that the important things are that I could look backwards from Robin Hood and see that the one person in my school was my English teacher who had faith in me. And I could see that he'd given me the school, leading the school play, that he had let me write for the school magazine, and I'd won the school photography prize at 15. I found him in retirement after Robin Hood succeeded and thanked him, because I could see a line backwards of somebody believing in me. And it was that man somewhere in the back of this all that kept me going. And it's that irrational. Creativity and anxiety are the same engine. We all have this multiplex thinker that goes to all these gorgeous and unique places and brings out these things from our life and from our zeitgeist and from things we've read and things we've treasured and people we've met. And at the same time, it also has a filter in it that says, this is a waste of time, this is crazy, you're never going to succeed. And this nag voice is very good. It's been practicing for millennia on people because I think it's designed to protect you from going in a cave or stepping off the edge of a cliff, and now it's trying to protect you from writing. And it doesn't need to do that, but it doesn't know that. And so one has to write despite that voice. And I really revere passion. I really think that when you write from a passionate place, that is getting to your nature. And you can't judge what's coming out. You won't know what's good or bad until you give it some time to look at it. And if you write from that passion frequently, a few days later look at it, your mind is blown because it's better than the stuff you could write if somebody put a gun to your head. So,
what do you do now, and even years back, et cetera, throughout your career, when you felt the passion was starting to dwindle a little? Were there moments where you're like, oh boy, I don't know if I have the passion anymore? How did you knew you had to get it back, and you knew it was always in there, I'm sure there were moments throughout the career where you just thought, boy, I'm just not feeling this. Is it the project? Is it me?
Well, I call it being ripe. I would like to be ripe all the time. I actually sought out David Edelman, who was a well-renowned psychologist and brain studier, saying, is there some way we could just switch on this passion thing and have it work? I'd like to be in flow. I'd like to have this sense that you're almost in a trance state taking dictation, because I think it's a natural state.
Yeah, athletes call it the zone. They get in the zone.
So if I could figure out how to get that to happen, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, I collect ideas, I collect Post-its. I have Post-its everywhere on my treadmill, in my car, and suddenly something will just trigger, and then you start writing. So I was saying about Robin Hood. After I finished Robin Hood, I knew I was going to write a story that was a historical film about a woman. I had no idea who it was. And I could feel it in my gut, like a story sausage, and or a gut instinct. And I looked for Molly Malone, I looked for Nell Gwynn, I looked for all kinds of people. Couldn't, and for 2 years, I was in this state of pregnancy, story pregnancy. And ended up hearing a thing on an orphans and foundlings home on PBS radio, where they had a museum where they kept the letters that the women had left 200 years earlier with the children they had abandoned on the doorstep. And I found myself within a day writing 4 lines of dialogue. And they were to a little girl who was 6 years old who'd just been taken out of an orphanage. And they're reading her a letter, and said, the woman who was present says, "What say you now, child, that you've heard your mother's story?" And the little girl says, "You could throw me out without a crust to eat, before I would say that woman is not worthy of my love." And she says, "Prepare yourself, child, for that woman I am your mother." And I had to write that.
That was in your head first before anything else.
Yes.
Is this Moll Flanders?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that it was the most amazing thing, because I shared it only with my assistant, who was a woman who had written a thesis on Sheroes of Brown. I did not tell my partners I was writing it because I didn't want any of those leg cleavings anymore. So I wrote it in secret while I was doing my normal work. It took 5 weeks, and it just literally poured out of me. And I wish every script would come like that. And the language was intense and wonderful and rich. And I was blown away by what I achieved. And we actually ended up getting the movie made. Well, we can talk about selling a movie if we get there. And I'm on the set, and my partner says, "How come none of your characters have mothers?" And I go, "Jesus. Robin Hood, no mother. Houdini was a story which I'd written about a person who loses his mother and misses her love so much he goes to psychics. And Moll Flanders was a woman who was born from a child I'd written, born from a woman who had got herself pregnant in prison, because by having a child, you got 9 more months of life. And so what I discovered was when you surrender to your passion writing, things come out of you that are rich and deep and very resonant. And it's my nature to write that.
And you kind of grew up feeling like you didn't have a mother.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was somewhat unconscious. I mean, if you were to sit down and think about it at whatever age, you were probably like, oh, well, yeah. But it wasn't something necessarily you focused on. I have to write stories about that. You just listened to what was coming out.
No idea I was doing it.
Yeah.
Just surrendering to it.
Yeah.
Now I know that it's a resonance of mine, and birth scenes are a resonance of mine. And I just say, fuck it, I'm doing it. Because you go, well, they're not allowed to put a birth scene in every movie. And I go, fuck it, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And if it's resonant, and if it's really emotional, and it's purposeful, and it says something about life, it's great. And if it's just a mechanical device you're putting in to try and get an effect, then it's not right.
Did you have a formal education, and maybe formal isn't the right word, but learning story structure, understanding flow, there's a natural rhythm to story, regardless of length. Was this something that you just always naturally had a sense of, or was there a series of books? Obviously you had mentors.
I don't know what I know. Working with Marshall McLuhan was helpful, because he said, look at an audience watching a movie, and you see the people are moving their faces with the characters on the screen. And I came to believe, and I do firmly believe, that we're all natural storytellers, and what's happening when we're watching a movie, and the synapses in our brains called the mirror neurons are firing off, and they found out that we as a creature mirror other people's behaviors because it's our empathy systems and it's our learning systems from living in groups for thousands or millions of years. And what they've even found out is that we micro-move our muscles on our faces, watching other people's expressions in synchronous harmony with them, and those movements are hardwired to our pain centers. And so when we see somebody act and they don't make those movements work, we call that bad acting. And what we're really doing when we're telling a story is we're allowing people to see into the actors' minds or the creation of the minds of the people and learn from their behavior. So I see watching a movie and I call it the learning trance. And I believe if you surrender to writing, and I don't think it's an accident we call Hollywood the Dream Factory, is I believe if you surrender to writing from that life script place, you will write naturally in a 3-act structure, because 3-act structures are what nature creates. Can I go into pitching?
Please, yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
That was technically the next question.
Oh, good.
So we're
Okay.
fine.
So, again, because I've worked with a partner and a brilliant man and a wonderful thinker in his own right, I will often verbalize what I was trying to achieve, and so I've got all these kind of like systems down. Hey, what if we do this and that? So I give a lot of thought to pitching, and I also ended up teaching a class of pitching at USC, and I watched the previous professor giving people 3 minutes to do the elevator pitch. And I'm going,
I will say, Ben, we have done this for our audience.
you do a 3-minute
We have,
India.
But
Okay.
I love this story, though, so let's keep
All
going.
right. Well, you know, the way I look at it is a pitch is a conversation. It's an opportunity for you to meet somebody. So the first thing is not to treat it like you've got 3 minutes and get in and out, because there's no humanness. And most of the time when people are meeting with you, they're looking at you to see whether you would like to write something, not necessarily what you're pitching, but whether it's something that you've got in a style or in an approach as a human being that they would like to put money into. And so they may well ask you to write for them on something they can't solve problems on. So I always say the first thing about pitching is research your buyer, because you can't sell to a stranger. And then when you come in the room, what you've done is you know a little bit about them and you try and find things that are commonalities or things that you can praise them for. So you lower their sense, you create a rapport. So you know that they were involved on Crazy Rich Asians. And so you can genuinely say you thought that was a hell of a movie, it was a breakthrough, you love to see these. And so what you're doing is you're creating a comfort zone so that you can then go on and explore something together. But if you just go in and start pitching, you haven't created the fundamental thing of a relationship. So first rule, research your buyer, be authentic, find things that are commonalities. They can be that you both went to the same alma mater, it can be that you both love the same football team. But if you don't research your buyer, you're just wasting your own time by going there and not using the tools of relationship building.
I try to ask a question about them, meaning you find something out with the research, ask them what was it like going to this school or whatever. If you have them answering you, then it becomes a conversation, and it's not you just standing there and they're like, okay, go ahead and tell your story, because that's just nerve-wracking.
And if you have a system that's comfortable and truthful to you, it makes going into a pitch it lowers your threshold of anxiety a lot. I also like to drink coffee before I go in because I'm sharper. I also always try and pay attention to the assistants, because I'll be talking to the assistant, not the person next. And I'm going to say something like, is this a good time to chat? And because I was human and cared about the assistants, sometimes I'll take the assistants to coffee to get to know them better, because they're a conduit into the world that I want to get into. And they have their own goals and their own hopes, and they're usually people trying to go up the ladder as well. So then the second thing, my 4 points are really simple. Create rapport by researching and identifying mutually positive things. Then I say demonstrate passion. And what I say is that even a incoherent pitch that's passionately given with excitement and personal investment is going to perk somebody up. And so by demonstrating passion, they wonder if you aren't going to infect them with your story. But I don't pitch the story right away. I demonstrate why I'm passionate about it. And then I'm trying to induce them into a state of excitation about what I'm about to deliver through my own gigantic sense of, wow, this is so freaking cool. And here's why it's cool. And no one's ever done a movie like this. And my demo, which is like a bullshit thing, but it's what I use to help understand what I'm talking about, is I say, my passion demonstration is, I will say, my wife had a dream, and it was so scary it kept her up nights, and then she told me, and I found I couldn't sleep, so I got up and tried to turn it into a movie. And when you demonstrate passion, you're really saying to the person, if you use me, I'm going to invest every ounce of my soul in this thing. It's not just a mechanistic job. This is part of my life that I'm going to go and put everything into it that I can. And this is a guy who's looking at taking you to his boss, and his job's on the line. So who's he going to give the job to? The person who's mechanistic, or somebody who's so excited that you know that you're going to run down the marathon no matter what to get to the end? Then this is still not pitching the story. Identify the story in ways that the development person or the director or the actor would like to see succeeding with. And that means finding, I say, 2 goalposts. Find 2 movies that your movie is like, that have been successful as hell, and your movie is naturally, understandably like that. It could be the next iteration of it, but what you're really doing is you're defining where these people look. And if you don't do that, they've got all day long, they've got incoming calls from agents, people screaming about deal points and things. And if you don't do the thinking for them, your movie is just you're expecting them to look at the plateau of their life and figure out what your movie is. So in my demonstration, I say, the dream that I took and wrote was sort of ended up being a script that's sort of halfway between Alien and The Exorcist. And I've got your attention. They're 2 major hits. They made money. They're understandable, and I've now got what I call my goalposts, and then I kick my movie through it, which is I say, and my story is about a defrocked priest who's also an archaeologist, and he's taken to the moon by NASA because they found the devil's bones up there, and people are getting possessed. And I know I can sell it.
Is that actually a project that you were?
No.
Okay.
No. But it's the best way of illustrating selling, because you think the pitching is putting 3 minutes in the line. It isn't. Pitching is telling somebody that all your life you've had this dream to do something. I've loved magicians since I was a tiny child, and I had this idea of making a movie on Houdini, and I had this vision. I actually made a film which was about Houdini as a documentary, and then I ended up making this idea for a film which was using his 10th anniversary seance and his wife coming to that anniversary, and it's the last time she'll ever do it. And they're doing it on a stage that he used to perform on that's been turned into radio, and the radio host is tricking her. And he's got a fake psychic, and he's gonna make a fool of her. And Houdini's brother comes, and Houdini's assistant comes, and all that crucible is on the stage. And you go through the seance, and when she arrives, she's forgotten to bring a memento of their lives, which everybody else has brought. And she feels so foolish. And then she realizes she's wearing the wedding ring that they had. And so she takes it off and puts it on the table. And it's true, when they met, within a day, he'd had a wedding ring made for her with the word believe engraved in it. And I had this idea that the seance is starting to look like Houdini's coming through, but his ghost is on the stage, but no one can tell. And his whole thing is, I want to show the fucking world how brilliant I am. I'm going to escape from death. I am now going to be as great as God. And then he can't quite get through. And it seems like the medium is getting through, and then Houdini's brother reveals that she's a fraud, and that they've been researching Bess and getting her drunk and getting secrets out of her. And she collapses, and the whole thing falls apart. And everybody leaves this, and Houdini's left on the stage. And he's going, oh fuck. And what he's seen is his wife destroyed. And now all he wishes was that he could comfort her. And he's seen what their whole life was about. And that was the thing that was most important to him. And then she walks back on the stage alone. And she's forgotten the ring. And she sits at the table, and she picks it up and puts it on her finger and starts to walk off. And he calls after her, Bess. And she keeps walking. And he says, Bess. And And she sort of hesitates, and he says, does it matter whether I'm imagining you or you're imagining me? That's what's inside the ring, believe. And she turns and she sees him, and no one else does. I had to write that. But did you notice I didn't tell you one thing about Houdini's life?
Yeah.
And the rest of the movie has all of the steps in his life. Now, if I was to pitch every step in his life, you'd be bored silly.
Right. And that's important in terms of trying to tell a biopic. But what I love is that you were just telling a story. It was a moment within the idea of the film. But that's where most audience members, especially producers, agents, managers, et cetera, the industry people live. They live in moments. And if you can give them a basic sense, like you were saying, it's Aliens meets Exorcist or whatever, and then you give them a moment that's an example of that, they're like, oh wow, tell me more. And it becomes like an engaging back and forth conversation as opposed to you just, here's, it starts with this and it starts with that. I mean, Walt Disney was famous for pitching the entire movie to his animators, but that was because he wanted his animators to see all the scenes and moments. It's the last thing you want to do when pitching a producer or something.
We've had experiences where we had a gentleman come in with a 40-page document pitch, and the buyer is sitting in the room and says, "I've only got 30 minutes. Can you just shorten it?" And the guy says, "Yeah," and he keeps reading.
He's just reading straight from it. Oh God.
And eventually the client, who's, I'm not going to say which studio, just says, "I have to go." And he leaves his assistant to hear the end of it. But he's not going to get the job.
Yeah. Oh Lord. Well, we have maybe 25 minutes. Does anybody have any questions immediately? Anything that you want to ask? There's one in the back. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Not only wonderful movies, but I've been impressed for years with the reboot of Outer Limits.
Yeah.
You with Mick Garris and the other individual who were frequently listed as the writers on a lot of the episodes. Is that still an ongoing, because it was coming from Canada, right?
We shot it there because it lowered the cost, but it was coming from MGM. They'd asked me to look at whether I could come up with a formula for bringing it back, and they wanted me to put 2 characters ongoing and copy the X-Files. And I talked to friends of mine like Frank Darabont, and I said, this is a hallowed thing. If I just turn it into that, which they did with Friday the 13th, I think, I'm missing the opportunity to create what I would see as a feast of the imagination. I see both the Twilight Zone, which I also was able to bring back, as a set of parables about life. And like Rod Serling, who I felt I was shining the mantle on him, not taking it, he made us understand humanity and learned about ourselves by using science fiction or fantasy like a lens on an ant. It just makes you run faster. But it brings out these things and emotions that, and they're really just giant fairy stories. They're goblins or they're strange machines but they're all to bring out humanity. And so I love doing them. And again, I did them with a team of wonderful people. Mark Stern, who was the guy who tipped me off to start writing Robin Hood, ended up running our television company and ended up working on all of our Outer Limits, and then ended up running the Sci-Fi Channel. So,
and is that still an approach or a concept that could be rebooted again if it's not already existing in some
it's possible. I don't own it. MGM owns it. In the same way as I did the Twilight Zone in 2002, and I had spent 4 years persuading Les Moonves to do the Twilight Zone. I'm going to jump through the phases of that. I started by trying to create my own anthology series because I thought, how hard can that be? Because I had lots of story ideas, and I collect my ideas. They don't always work, but then you go back a month later, a year later, and suddenly you add a bit to it. So I thought, well, I'll try and pitch my own story collection. No one was interested. But I happened to accidentally discover that it was the 40th anniversary of the Twilight Zone coming up. So I did up a document that I sent to Les Moonves, who I knew because we'd done a TV series with him before, suggesting that on the anniversary maybe we could do a special, or we could do, and he said yes, and then he said no. And because I know my agent who didn't close the deal before I had the opportunity. And so then I wrote Les a letter saying, you know, what's wrong? And he said, well, anthologies don't work on TV.
And this was when?
This was 2003, 2002, something like that. And I wrote him a note back saying, dear Les, you know, this is not true. Anthologies work. You had 2 #1 shows out from anthologies. One was 60 Minutes, same host, different stories every week. And Unsolved Mysteries, same host, different stories every week. It's an anthology. That's not the same thing. So I was shut down. Then we did a little clip a year later of all the cool shit that we were doing with the Outer Limits, all the wonderful CGIs and things that we've been able to use in breakthroughs in TV. And this was pretty impressive. And I said, okay, the Twilight Zone music on it, send it. So I delivered it to Les's assistant. She was blown away. It's great imagery. Shows it to Les. Les says, no way. So 3 passes. Then a year later, I hear that Les has now taken over UPN, and UPN's #1 show and only real hit is Star Trek. And I get this idea, and I'm too scared to do it. And I go to my partner, John, and I say, John, would you talk to Les about the idea of putting Star Trek with the Twilight Zone? I said, I'm not doing that. Whoa, it's your idea, you do it. I was scared. I thought he would be screaming at me if I go back to him. And this is what I call framing devices. Sometimes you have to sell by finding something that makes you comfortable. And that's not dishonorable, that's not a trick, it's just human nature. Sometimes we're putting ourselves in places where the discomfort's pretty big, and we have to find a way of doing it. So I came up, which out of the blue, and by the way, I recommend taking showers, because they found that the theta waves, or whatever it is that happens when you're in a shower, causes creativity to happen. So if you're ever stuck, go take a shower, because it may solve problems.
That's great.
Here's what I did. I ended up coming up with a letter that I sent to Les, which I could stomach, which was, Dear Les, so help me, I swear, I will never mention the words Twilight Zone to you ever again after this. How about having it as a companion piece to Star Trek? He had me in his office the next day. He gave me 10 days to come up with anything I wanted, a presentation, a booklet, and I came up with a 1-hour pilot script because I knew I wouldn't have a chance unless I did that. I didn't know I could write a 1-hour pilot script, but sometimes when passion and you just surrender, I had no other choice. It was like, do it or don't do it, so I did it. We were shooting that within 50 days. And we ended up shooting 43 or 42 episodes.
But 52 days plus 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And a heck of a lot of tenacity and reaching out and believing in something, yeah.
And many other things fail. So it's not like, you know, what I want you to know is that when your scripts aren't selling, it's not an indication of anything wrong with the script. I liken scripts to sperms in this town. There are thousands of viable scripts and very few eggs in production.
That is so true.
And so if you blame yourself for not selling your script, you're harming yourself unfairly. What we have is, I'm in the Oscars judging thing. I get to see all these videos. And every year there's about 280 movies that qualify for a Best Picture nomination. Now you think about that, you're all writing screenplays. So, you know, what are the chances of your screenplay getting to be eligible for Best Picture, which means it's been shown in enough theaters to be. So that shows you the incredible challenge that you've taken on when you're writing a screenplay. They're hard to sell, they're hard to get made. And what you have to do, which is why I believe in passion, is you have to write them for yourself. Everyone you write, nothing is lost, everyone strengthens you, everyone increases your spirit. And when you take pieces of your life and invest them in something that's creative, you're gaining as a human being. If you're doing that with authenticity and discovery and a sense of looking for poetry, you're an artist, but you can't guarantee the end result. So then how do you deal with that? And my answer is, you have to say, I chose to do this. You're not trapped. What you are is making a choice, and that's empowering. Now you're looking at, I'm actually in control. I'm doing this because I want to. No one said I had to. And part of the game also is we chose the worst damn thing. We got millions of dollars out there. He's writing novels. I'm more struck that he can get a novel out of his mind, because that seems overwhelming to me. But it doesn't cost him any more once he's written it to get it up and out and people using it. Whereas we've chosen to have obstacles of giant amounts of money, and we have to get it put through only a certain minimal number of channels that will actually take a movie. And so that comes down to, what is this we're doing? And I believe that the nearest analogy I can come up with is like a sport, in that I love what I do so much, and I liken it to American football. I strap on that frickin' hat, and I go out there and I take the hits, I get stripped, I get knocked down, I get benched. I have to put a team together to do what I do. Some of my team are idiots, some of them are wonderful people. I have to inspire some people to get to my goal, but you can't do it on your own. And if you are so passionate about your work that it is the thing you must do, if it is like a sport that just, it enriches you when you do it, then it's worth the pain. So, I yearn for you guys to succeed, but I yearn for you also to find fulfillment. And that's even more important. And that's why I come back to saying, right from the heart, right from the things that you're emotionally enriched by, and keep trying, keep working, keep looking at how to sell it. Don't just write one piece, keep writing. Because each time you write, there's a horrible thing to say, oh, that script's one isn't enough. No, but it should be a life for you. And
you should want to start another one.
Yeah.
I think that deserves a round of applause. Thank you for that, Ben. I mean, I think we all need to hear that. We all need to remember why it is we're doing what we're doing, because like you said, we're choosing to do this. Nobody's holding a gun to our head. So why not find ways to actually enjoy it? And obviously coming to events like this helps just to stay inspired. But also afterwards, we're going to go and get some drinks at the bar, and you should be chatting with everybody, because we haven't really talked about networking and relationships, and we don't really have that much time. But it's important and essential. I mean, you have a team, and you put that team together through people who you knew, or you're friends with, you're introduced to. It's essential. Any other questions? We have a couple more right in the front. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. First of all, I love your movies, especially the westerns. And,
Mag 7? Yes.
I saw that you're executive producer on Harriet.
Yes.
That's correct. And I was curious how much to the extent of work that you had involved with the script of that movie.
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud to have my name on Harriet. I started the project in 1990. It took 4 years for us to find a company that would finance the writing of a script. And then we worked with Gregory Allen Howard, who is now the co-writer and producer on it. We tried selling it various places. We did sell a movie on the Buffalo Soldiers to TNT, but we didn't get Harriet sold. And I was approached by the team that now have produced the movie, would I move on our rights? And so I said yes. And I didn't charge them for moving on the rights, but I asked them if they would be kind enough to give us a credit on it, because we so wanted to see the movie made.
Cool. There's one over here and one over there. Yeah, right in front.
It's lovely to hear from you, and I'm really inspired by you talking about what you like consultant your work. But Prince of Thieves wasn't without its issues, and with the Kevin Costner involvement, is there a point where you had to let go, and how did you let go that this creation is no longer my creation and take on whatever,
Yes, lots of that.
Yeah. How did you deal with that?
Well, I actually quantified, first of all, the movie wouldn't have gotten made unless I brought in the director, who was a friend of mine. And I knew that there was a good chance, because he'd worked with Costner on a Fandango, which was Costner's first feature, which was like a school project almost. That there was a good chance that he would come on and work with Kevin Reynolds. But that meant I was stepping out, and there are some movies where you feel okay stepping out. And Moll Flanders, I told my wife to bury it with me. No one gets to direct that. And the difference is phenomenal to me. So we went through lots of additions to the scripts and things that I agreed with, things we didn't. We ended up where the script got better as different people added things, and when it got complicated, we ended up editing the movie at the end and putting it into a balance that we thought was appropriate. The birth scene wasn't something that the people tried to save money by not shooting the birth scene, and I begged Kevin to put his weight behind getting it because I know Kevin was a dad and he'd had kids. And so we got it shot, but it wasn't included in the first cut. And I ended up at a meeting at Warner's with the honchos, the guys in the big office and the financier of the movie and other people. And I said, something's wrong with this room. And they went, what? And I said, 50% of humanity isn't represented here, guys. And I said, I want to try the birth scene. And they're like, right, it's already on. I said, oh, yeah, I'll try it. So I cut the birth scene. It took about 4 minutes. The movie's over length. I'm sure I'm going to get shit for it. But we go to a screening room. The honchos are up the front. I'm looking at their heads as they're watching this 4 minutes. And all around me are all the people waiting for this to be damned and thrown out not to go in. And the two guys turn around after nattering with each other if the lights are up, and they say, last week we tested Doc Hollywood. There was a birth scene in that. The audience really liked it. Put it in.
Oh my God. Because Doc Hollywood's the same movie.
But I had won my movie. I had won putting in the thing that was the most important seed. Because when I wrote the script, I cried when I was writing that part. And I thought, you're not allowed to put a birth scene in an adventure movie. And yet, my heart really wanted to. And I just kept fighting for it. And the same with putting Sean Connery at the end. There was a move to put John Cleese at the end of the movie, and I couldn't stomach that because I felt that the movie, all of the care, all the investment, all the love, all the effort that the characters were playing came down to a joke. And so I went to Mike, the gentleman that ran CAA, personally, and I'm a coward, but I tell you what happens is passion empowers you, whereas technique doesn't. I so wanted not to have the John Cleese that I said, would you give me Sean Connery? And we can't give him a credit because you can't have the whole audience waiting the whole movie to see him. But he only has to work one day. And they looked at the scene and they said, yeah, we'll give him $1 million.
Look.
And I go, no, you don't understand. We're already over budget. We can't afford that. But it will, I guarantee you, it'll be a piece of film history. They ended up that they cut a deal where they donated $250,000 to a hospital in Scotland. And that's how Sean Connery ended up in the movie.
Oh my God.
And that's what I mean about passion. I couldn't do that for something I didn't care about. Because I'm literally a coward. I'm shy, I'm complicated, I'm an artist, I get confused easily. And the passion actually is like a compass for me. I can feel that, and I know where that's going.
You know it's coming from a real place. So there's less of a need to feel afraid of it, even though it's still scary.
I really don't lie because I couldn't lie. Sometimes I will ask my partner to take evasive calls because I can't lie because I come from that same place. It's like, who am I? What am I? I didn't do that. It's about finding an intense value in what you do. And I wrote a book on screenplay writing, by the way, which is called Writing the Alligator, with the whole idea of trying to help people keep their voice in a business that would not necessarily be conscious it was knocking it out of you, but not necessarily aware of how important that voice could be to their success too. And the last chapter is, was it worth it? And I found the worst review I could find at Moll, Flanders. And I put it in the book, and I said, this woman has a right to call me all those things and to say that I'm an awful, horrible human being. That's her choice. But if you ask me if I knew that was coming and other people had addressed me that way, would I do the movie again? Yes, I would. And the other thing I did, which I was sharing today, I asked the chairman, I had decided I would never direct again if I fucked it up. I felt that I love my business so much, I'm either going to be a decent director or I should shut the fuck up. And if Moll Flanders didn't work as a movie to my belief of what the caliber of talent should be in me, then I will never direct again. And I looked at the final movie, I cried places in the movie. It was never a great success because it It had various issues in terms of coming out in the summer and missing things, but it's still the most important thing I've done in my life. And I asked the chairman of the board of MGM if I could dedicate it to my mother, but I put her maiden name on it, so no one knew.
The beginning of Writing the Alligator says, don't listen to anything anybody says, including me. So just talk about that a little bit. I mean, obviously, you've been listening to me say all this tonight. I think it's very worthwhile, but I think it's important to note.
Whatever the things are, the magic bells that cause you to function, if someone like me comes along and says, well, that's not right, this isn't the way to do it, I'm just pulling you down, and I'm not learning from what you could be. So each of us are our own instrument, and I don't know what you could create. And I love challenging myself to try and encourage people to create things that would never exist if they hadn't reached out and discovered them. I don't know what I'm going to write when I'm writing. I don't know what you're going to write. So for me to try and box you in and tell you the right way to write, it's fucking insane. What I can do, though, is to say that my writing process has been insane. It's been great. It's been miserable. I've taken on jobs where I was plucking the words out of my flesh. It was so wrong. I was doing things I shouldn't have been writing. And other times when it has been like so sensual, it was like joy. And but it's wacky. And so if you realize that you've joined an eccentric band, that you're members of a tribe of creative people, you're like shaman for our communities, you're teaching people through the experiences that you're sharing through those characters. And I really believe the purpose of a movie is to teach people how the characters cope with stresses that have been brought in. I believe that we watch a movie to learn about ourselves by seeing characters struggle. So when you watch a movie and it's a hero, and you know he's a hero all the way through, no struggle, no learning. Whereas if you take a person and they've had a dramatic problem in their lives, and I'll give an example. The guy's getting married to a girl, they get closer and closer to the wedding, and he's in her life every day, everything she does, she finally starts to feel he's so claustrophobic with her that she calls it off. And she says, I can't do this. And he says, I don't know why. And he says, my mother left the family on Christmas Eve when I was 5 years old, and I didn't know how I had failed to love her enough so she would stay with us. And she says, I'm not your mother, you have to give me my freedom. And the last act is, can he emancipate himself enough to give her freedom so that they can be together? And what I did was I told you what I call a nugget. And most scripts, if you can look at a script as a short story and look at your character's journey in the script, it comes down to you finding the real reason you're writing the story. And most script analysis doesn't really bring this out, but if you know why your script has got the character's journey in it. We discovered this when we were doing a film called The Flying Tigers, where we took a bunch of guys, young guns in the air. We needed one guy who was bold and brassy and a great flyer but didn't want to go, the reluctant one, and we wanted the guy that wanted to go. And what happened was the Americans allowed a bunch of flyers to secretly demob and go to China to fight against the Japanese. And they would pay $500 per plane they shot down, promised concubines, which didn't happen. Right. But how do we turn that into a story? So we said, okay, two buddies, one doesn't want to go, so we force him to go. So he's caught screwing the commander's daughter in an airplane, and it's given the no choice. It's either court-martial, go to hell, or you go with the others. When he gets there, he doesn't want to go, he doesn't want to stay, and then his best buddy gets shot down by the Japanese. And the leader of the Flying Tigers is an eccentric, and he realizes that this man can lead the others not to get shot down. And he says to him, I need you to lead the men. The other guy says, I don't want to take any responsibilities. And then we said, why? And that was the first time we'd ever asked that question. And I remember being in a bar in Prescott, Arizona, where there was a bullet hole in the ceiling where some guy got in and shot himself. And I thought, how about this? That this man says that when I was a kid, my dad in 1929 was an accountant to all these families, and they all lost their homes and lost their futures, and he went into a bar and shot himself, and I don't want to take responsibility for others. And then Chenault says, these men need you. They will die if you don't. So that's what we call a nugget, excuse me, which is the driving force of why you're really watching the movie. And these things are very simple. They're usually biological. They're usually a loss of a family member. A woman loses her husband and marries someone else while she's still pregnant. The kid is born and he realizes that she only married him so she could get a husband, so she could have one for the kid. And so she is resented by the husband. And every time the kid acts up, he beats the mother. And so you have a child that grows up scared of acting out, thinking he's responsible for his mother being beaten. And then he has to overcome that to help someone in a troubled situation. And those things, those simple 3 steps, you reveal them at the belly of the beast of your movie, the third act structure, and you reveal that and you can spell it out, 3 lines of dialogue, it will transform your script. Because now you're telling the audience what they're really learning about your characters. And if you have more than one nugget, it's confusing, and not so much in a TV show, but in a feature film. But one simple one can be the most empowering thing. I call it nutrition. It's the seed we learn from. So when we're watching a movie, when those mirror neurons are firing off, we're learning about ourselves and what strategies we would take from these people struggling to put into our own lives so that we can improve our own opportunities.
Watch any Pixar movie. They do it perfectly at the end. All right, there was one person in the back who had their hand up, maybe? Yes, they had on.
Thank you for all that. My last script has done really well in festivals.
Great.
I got in the Nickel Fellowship and some finalists and number of other ones. So I sent it to a number of production companies that made similar movies with that, all of that involved. Almost all of them said we don't take unsolicited work. So I looked up the top 100 agents, sent all that to them, and heard one generic response. So I'm kind of wondering if you have any advice beyond handwritten notes, which I will take into account.
Yeah, I do think that did you address it to a person?
No, I mean, when you look it up, there's not really an individual.
Then you have to do the research. You have to Google. You have to look up old copies of Variety and see what these people were talking about when they were interviewed. And that's the way that you get to personalize it. And it sounds, I'm very sympathetic because, this is what we all do. We're all struggling to try and get through that invisible barrier. The more personal you can make it, the more real your chance of getting through. Or the more research you do by finding if they've got a development team and is the name of the development team, and then writing them personally. Again, you've got to single people out, because when you write a generic, they assume you send it out to 100 places. I certainly do, and I assume 100 places passed on it, so why would I look? And that's the not fair at all, but I do think nickels is a magic word. I think it gives veracity to what you're trying to do. But you're, without researching, without finding a way of creating rapport with somebody, you're still a stranger selling. And if you can find a way of uncovering that strangeness and putting it into a place where you create a curiosity about what you could give to that person to make them more successful. And that comes back to, again, what do they want? What are they looking for in their lives, whoever that is that you're choosing to send it to? And, it's that is the question that you need to define in the letter, which is, I loved your 3 films that you did on this subject. This is another subject that's like that. Or do you have any advice? Because even asking for advice and then phoning up, it's painful, but it's...
There's also a level, and I think this is a good segue because obviously we want to be talking about relationships and making as many friends as you can, network, go to the events like this, join us at the bar afterwards. But there's also an intense amount of patience that we need because, I remember this was a few years ago, I was hosting a class and I brought in a writer who wrote on the Goldbergs and a few other TV shows. And I'll never forget his advice, and he said that we don't have control over our timeline. We have 0 control over when someone else is going to say yes. What we do have control over is what we do with the script once it's done and what we do with ourselves as a writer once we're done with just that script. And the only real level of control we have is to just write another script. So I would be as patient as you can. Don't be too eager. That who knows when that script might pop. It could be 6 years from now. So you have to then be generating new material in that time and just keep on churning stuff out. Because if you can prove to people that you've got 3 or 4 or 5 scripts that have placed highly in nickel or won a few in big contests, then things are really going to start to happen. So, it may not be the best thing that you want to hear, but honestly, patience, I think, is a
And
big
the
thing.
other one is find an advocate. In other words, is there somebody who isn't you who is given status? So it could be another director saying, I love this guy's script, it isn't my style, but you guys should read it. That'll get through the door. Or if it's a professor teaching writing, and they say, I've read 50 scripts this year, and this is the best one I read. You guys should look at it. So that you're looking for someone else to open that door with that award advocate sense. I don't know if the nickel people, I don't know if they've got any system for helping. Certainly, it's also researching and networking, seeing if anybody else knows people in the system that can help you. And it means also reaching out to the assistants and saying, hey, I know you work with this guy, I adore his work, could I take you to lunch and get some advice? And making that effort, and it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Carrie.